Hi, welcome to Detours Understanding Acquired Brain Injury. And as you can see, we have our regular Emily returning with us, and we're going to be talking about schooling and education and, the challenges of returning after brain injury. It's something we both are familiar with, but Emily wants to share, just the interplay, especially as a more recent survivor, and how that affects her. Emily? Hi.
Hi. I am taking a phlebotomy course right now. I figured I'd be having a lot of downtime, so I wanted something to kind of work towards while I'm at home. And it's definitely a lot more of a struggle than it was before for me to obtain information and then also retain it. Um, so that I have to do a lot of writing. I just pretty much write down everything the teacher instructor says, and then I go over it like 100 times, and then I'm typically able to take the quiz without an issue, and I'll pass. But it takes a lot more study time for me now to get to the point where I could pass. So it's been a challenge, but I'm really glad I did it. So there's kind of like a negative side, there's also a positive side because it's not necessarily something I even would have done before my TBI. Like it made me care less about what other people thought or how I felt about myself. So I was just like, well, I want to do it, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and that's definitely an emotional advantage. Again, this is like something that comes up, as far as with the other videos too, is like that reduction in anxiety. The video I made with Kate about some of the positives, and one of them is with less worry about like other people as well as less worry about yourself, less fear. So okay, sure, what the heck, we'll try this. And so that's definitely an advantage, especially if you were more anxious before. I found that's an advantage, and Kate and I talked about that. She finds that's an advantage too. Certainly less worry about like messing up. Some people actually it gets worse for them, but for most of us, it's like who found we've gained something, it's like go for it. So now you also, though, you point out something valid too, is that it takes a lot more effort for many of us, especially those of us who are really good with academics. We could memorize and we could do, I mean, with the short-term memory being shot, we have to
Well,
approach it with a whole new study skills instead of just like reading through the book once or twice and then done, or just taking a few pointers with your notes, just like here and there. It's like that's not the way you can do it anymore.
no, yeah, it's really weird to have to modify it so much as compared to before the TBI. Like, wow, there is a big difference there. Nobody really warns you about that. So here's a warning. Like,
Yes. How have your study skills changed? What have you had to do differently?
um,
You've told us a little bit, but like,
it takes me a lot more time and patience, which I'm getting better with. I'm like, okay, yeah, everything that I do take double whatever the amount was time before. It's like double the time now. So, but yeah, it's really a lot about being repetitive and writing everything down for me. And then words that I don't understand, I get on Google, go to the dictionary, look it up, and then write the definition several times until I feel like I really have it
right.
kind of planted in my brain. Of course, nothing's uh nothing's sure when I study. It's not like I know I'll memorize it, but I will try my
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, for me, it's like, how about your reading skills? This is something for a lot of people that have been adversely affected too.
Yes, because I had that eye that was in or like pointing in, it's coming
Yeah,
back to me now, but a lot of the time when I'm reading or something, my eyes start to cross.
converge. Yeah,
Yeah, and so then I start getting the double vision and headaches, and it can be a real nuisance sometimes, especially when I've got like an assignment due and I'm trying to deal with the physical aspect of the injuries that I sustained. So that makes it tricky because you can't really like have a routine schedule, which is what I typically like to do. But
hmm,
I know how I'm going to feel.
right.
So it's nearly impossible to say, okay, I can get this done this day. So trying to stay on top of that has definitely been difficult for me.
And how do you find reading itself? Because a lot of people say I can't read because I can't process the words like I used to and or understand or keep it in my memory long enough what I previously read. So I just don't find it a good thing anymore. I find it very difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult for me. So I like to videos where they'll actually read, show the words on the
Mhm.
screen.
Right.
Seems to work best as far as like trying to retain something, but also taking notes during those videos. It's like that's the gold standard for me is taking those notes. And I mean like every word too.
Yes.
It's not like it was before where it was like I could write a word and kind of figure out what it meant just by
Yeah.
looking at it. Nope, that's not happening anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I had to relearn to read. I mean, I assume you did too, or at least like bring yourself up to grade. I mean, I could, but it was like really like
Yes. So,
way back, third grade, second grade, and I needed help getting all the way back up again. I mean, some basic words and stuff like that. So I needed help getting back up. I'm sure it's not to where it used to be, but it's good enough that I can read medical texts and things like that. But I'm slow too. My
oh,
processing is slow.
yeah, I am really slow when it comes to my school stuff, which in some ways I think is it might be better because I think that I am probably actually absorbing more information by doing this, where before it would be get through it and like, forget about it. And now it's like, well, I've learned a lot of new things or new words because I have repeated them so many times to make sure that I've memorized them. So I guess where I don't care so much about what other people think, I do care more about things that actually do matter,
Right.
which isn't
And
like of other people or
that's part of maturation too. It's part of becoming an adult, you know.
yeah,
I mean, part of, a lot of these things aren't necessarily directly brain injury related. Some of them are related more to, having to, oh shit, I almost died. And now, I survived. Now I have to, restart over again in a lot of ways. And so, um, what's important? What isn't? I face something horrible and,
yeah, it's
who am
definitely
I?
I
So that's part of it too.
see, yeah, and correlate that. So that's yeah.
It's like that kind of existential work, most people do it twice. They do it like when they're near graduation and a high school, getting ready to choose, it's like when in ninth, 10th, 11th grade, when you're like looking at your career and it's like, who do I really want to be? You have plenty of time to mess around before then, but suddenly, boom, at the end, you're like, oh, hey, this really is important. And so you've got to like make those choices. And then you need to do it again, like towards the end of your career and everything else. Like, what did I do? What did I stand for? Do I, it's like look back in your life and it's like, do I want to do something else completely different? Do I want to work, retire? What legacy I'm holding. Hopefully you're trying to do that throughout your career, but when you got kids and you got, your job and, everything else, that kind of ties you up. It keeps you from really addressing these things. But those of us with acquired brain injury, that slams on the brakes pretty darn hard. And then you're faced with, hence the reason I call this detours, our production arm of forensic brain injury, because brain injury is one heck of a detour. And since you can't go the highway you're planning on going, you got to find another way to get around to, so those are the times we do our another existential review of life and decide what matters and what doesn't. And who we want to be now, especially since we can't go the fast way we were hoping we would be going. Um, that's why it's called that.
Yeah, it makes sense because it is. It's literally a detour from there
your
was
your planned path,
yeah, and it completely went the other way.
right?
Like,
And yep,
oh,
you are doing something other than what you probably would have ever expected, but it doesn't mean it's bad necessarily. It just means it's different.
yeah. I mean, like today we had a laugh at my house because I guess I put some pistachio gelato in the refrigerator and not the fridge. So
Are
like
hmm,
that is it's super harmless and it's actually kind of funny.
mm-hmm.
So like lighthearted about it.
Yeah.
I think it's helped.
Yeah,
And
no, I do weird stuff like that all the time, and I get, it's like you can get a laugh out of it as long as the people with you aren't trying to be mean about it, as long as they're
yeah,
enjoying the jokes with you, sure, what the heck, have fun with it. And there are some, and certain people you like to hang out with, it's like who, this is one of the good things about hanging out with us sometimes is just like a lighthearted laugh occasionally, or some of us, if less inhibited and stuff, it's can bring joy too.
yeah,
Just kind, and some, you know, not as stressed, you know?
exactly. Exactly. And I think that's why I chose like probably one of the most stressful times in my life to go to school. I'm like, this seems like a good time. And it really is about like my brain has just shut that off for some reason. It's like I don't get overwhelmed as easily.
And that's part of your brain injury. That's one of the advantages. Again, Kate and I talked about that. About 20% of people with brain injury, um, they feel, like they're improved from it. They're,
Yeah.
at least the psychiatric side, the psychological side is
Yeah.
improved. So you maybe trade some of your cognitive for emotional, being better emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. I find
And
myself a lot of people get mourning. It's done like the opposite thing for me where I think I'm a lot nicer,
mhm,
calmer.
yeah, you're very sweet, and it's like you're kind, and it's like that's a good thing. A lot of people's partners and stuff will say, oh, they're nicer, they're better, warmer. But it doesn't happen to everybody. A lot of people don't.
Yeah,
But at least if they don't do a lot of the existential work, if they don't like, why did I survive? If they don't ask those W questions, why did I
yeah,
survive? Who am I now? If they refuse to ask those questions because they refuse to try to do better. Now, obviously, if you're so severely impaired that, you end up in a nursing home or something else like that, like, and you can't move forward,
right,
that's different.
right.
But for most of us, fortunately, we're not that bad, or we can move forward. But, there are those who cannot, and that's a different situation. Just like any other disability, there's a broad range of
Oh
And it
yeah.
also takes time. In the beginning, things are a lot harder for us as we have to regain certain things, but things do get better over time. And they're wrong when they tell you, you're done in 1 to 2 years. That's simply just not true. Um,
Ye-
it's like, sorry, I have to have my legs stuck. Um, you have to, you know, like you will heal for the rest of your life. At first, you might measure that healing in meters or yards, and then over time, the healing's much slower, but it still goes on. Then it's inches or centimeters, and that's different, but it still is progress. It's just that when you look back, you need to look back over, like 10 years instead of over months or a year. But
right.
that's okay. It's like you also learn to accommodate because you move from injured neurons recovering enough to take over versus neuroplasticity, which is, a lot of learning is dependent on neuroplasticity. So you're relied on learning, which is, us talking about this here. It's like you are learning strategies for school. Anything else that you do to like help memory or like, planning stuff for school related?
I do, yeah, I make a schedule that I do try to stick by, which typically is my boyfriend's work week. So he goes in Monday through Saturday and works from 2 to 10. So I usually try to do at least 4 hours of schoolwork a day.
Mhm.
But if I'm having an off day, then you know what? It's fine. And I'll just take the day off.
Right,
That and before that wouldn't have been like I wouldn't be like, this is fine. I'd be like, I've got to do it anyway.
right.
God, how tired and exhausted I am. I know I'm not gonna do well on the quiz because I'm tired. It's like, give yourself the day off.
Yep,
Like, you'll feel so much better if you just take the day off and do a little extra work tomorrow. So
right.
yeah, definitely a lot more easygoing when it comes to things like that.
Sounds like it. And that's helpful for those of us with brain injury too, is to give ourselves extra time. I would talk about that. So yeah, giving yourself the grace and getting people around you to help support you too.
Yes. Yes, my boyfriend has been really helpful in pushing me along when it seems like I'm starting to kind of dull out, not want to do anything. So,
EA dynamia, man.
oh man, I'm like, I didn't even realize I had it until I started talking, and I was like, oh, that's me.
Yeah. Believe me, I've talked to a lot of different people who are like, oh, that's what that is. I always thought it was
Yeah,
just, nope, nope, that's something separate. It's related, but it's something separate. It's part of brain injury, unfortunately. It's
yeah,
an executive deficit. It's like, as I've said before, it's so many of our symptoms that are most disabling. Um, in essence, it's adult onset ADD, ADHD. Behind all the fancy words, that's really what it is. It is because you injure the same areas of your brain that are affected in kids who have ADD, ADHD, in the inattentive or mixed type. It's all it is. It's just that the psychiatrists have laid down like what it takes for diagnostic criteria. And the key or one of the key elements is that it must onset before the age of 18. So if you were before 18 and had your brain injury, you'd receive a diagnosis of, ADD, ADHD, along with some other things. As
yeah,
an adult, you'd receive a diagnosis of neurocognitive disorder due to traumatic brain injury and personality change due to traumatic brain injury with dysexecutive symptoms. And then they would list what comes with it. But and it's the same disorder, it's just the cause is different. One is genetic that affects that area of the brain and developmental. The other is due to trauma or disease, which attacks that same area of the brain. So it's basically, and the treatments are the same, both behavioral and cognitive, as well as some medications, the same medications. But it's in essence the same thing. So the strategies that work for the kids with ADD, ADHD, inattentive or mixed type in school are exactly the same ones that work for an adult with adult onset ADD, ADHD. I'm hoping eventually they change their minds and say, yes, this is adult onset ADD, ADHD. A friend of mine who's a psychiatrist with brain injury says, heck, I'll call it that anyway. I wasn't invited to the American Psychiatric Association meeting. I wasn't important enough. So, I'll call it whatever I want. Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. Makes total sense to me, even as a neuroscientist. It's like, I agree, because I have the same darn symptoms too from my brain
It's difficult, yeah, to have days where you're fine and you can do like everything,
injury.
and then want to do everything, but you just can't for some reason.
Yeah, no,
But
and that dynamic is part of ADD, ADHD too.
it's very frustrating. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if I were to grab off my shelf over there, the DSM-5 TR and read you the symptoms from the dysexecutive side versus ADD, ADHD for a kid of like 14, 12, 10, boy or girl, they're the same.
yeah,
They're identical for those kind of cognitive and psychosocial and emotional. But it's like they have the same kind of emotional problems. Again,
yeah,
because those are mostly frontal lobe symptoms. Same darn thing. And those are the most disabling too. And those affect school too, like emotional and irritability, aggressive, as well as like the trouble focusing, concentrating, calendar, and like keeping track of dates. And I mean, it's also why a lot of kids are missed who have traumatic brain injury. But one of the ways to pick out if your child has this, if your child has a brain injury versus ADD, ADHD, is they get a whole bunch of diagnoses at once from the school. They'll be told that they're oppositional defiant, ADD, ADHD, that they have a learning disability, all these things stacked on them at once
that
at an
was me.
early age.
That was me.
It's possible you may have suffered a traumatic brain injury or survived a TBI at a much younger age. You may have like fallen, hit your head. You may have had, you may have had a series of high fevers, which may have caused it. But a kid who gets like a whole slew of diagnoses at a very early age all at once, um, it's very, very likely that they had TBI because they look the same. And in kids, it's hard to just, but we're allowed to give these other diagnoses. The problem is they don't receive the extra cognitive rehab and things that they need, which make us a little different.
Yeah,
And developmentally, they need continuous support of those kinds, smaller groups, less light, they get overwhelmed emotionally as well as cognitively and in certain group situations. So even in public school, this is a factor too. And
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, did you at any point earlier were you told by your parents that you whacked your head really good or that you were, that you had, been very, very sick or anything like that early on?
Yeah, yeah, I was really sick when I was a baby, up at up until early adolescence.
Do you
And
remember what you had? Did you have meningitis at all or
I
encephalitis or anything weird like that?
actually had a kidney that was giving like a
Oh, that'll do it.
hospital, and I was having bladder infections, and
That'll definitely do it.
fever started spiking to like 107 degrees. So
That'll
I was
do it for sure.
with seizures for a while, and then
Okay.
I out of my
Yes.
crib, and I got a concussion from that.
Yeah.
I also fell off of monkey bars when I was
The and this
doing.
kind of thing, most PCPs don't know, because they really don't get exposure in med school to brain injury like this.
Yeah,
I have two of my books over there are for residents in neurology, and they have a single chapter on traumatic brain injury. One. There is another section on metabolic disorders, one chapter, and how it affects, the development of the brain. And there's another section on dealing with systemic illnesses and how it causes brain injury. And there's like three chapters on children. And that's for neurologists. that is a primary reference for neurologists. See, when I was going to school for neuropsychology, they taught us along with neurologists certain things. Now, our focus is more higher areas of the brain than throughout the entire brain. So, as a neuropsych, you're interested in the human cortex, the higher areas. But exactly what you said, I would bet you, if you didn't have those problems, if you hadn't hit your head, fallen off the monkey bars, hit your head in the crib, and then also had, metabolic problems like you're describing, you would not have had those diagnoses. For me, I've always suspected two or three things. One, my mom had digestive illness and took a lot of corticosteroids while I was developing. That can alter brain development, first of all. I have dysgraphia, which is a learning disability in handwriting. Fortunately, it didn't affect my intelligence. I mean, you all know my story. I've told it a billion times. But it did affect my ability for handwriting and perceiving like columns and lines. So I had two IEPs, one for giftedness, and I had one for my learning disability in handwriting.
Yeah.
But what's the weird thing is 20% of kids with learning disabilities are also gifted,
Yeah, I can definitely see
which
that.
is bizarre, but it has to do with when your brain develops, and everything is towards like abstract or higher thinking, you lose some in some areas, and that's at least a contemporary theory. Like now, I'm talking about specific learning disabilities. I'm not talking about how the British use learning disabilities, which is to mean intellectual disabilities, MR, as we used to call it. Americans use it to mean specific, and they're talking about dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia,
Yeah.
um, which is something else. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point, but our focus is on acquired, not developmental disabilities. However, sometimes acquired brain injury can be mistaken for a specific learning disability or general learning disabilities or ID when the kid actually injured their brain at a very young age
Yeah.
or was hypoxic or had a very high fever, metabolic, other kinds of problems like that, metabolic disorders. Anyway, I apologize. I digress. Logorrhea. I don't always know when to shut up, but yeah.
I always learn a lot from you. So,
Yeah, I was talking to a couple other people for the group, and they were like, I have that too, and it's like, I can't turn it off. And it's like, just interrupt me whenever you need to. But
oh, no, me. I will sit and I like listening.
so back to schooling, what are your like long-term plans? Do you want to go to like nursing school? Do you want to consider PA or med school, anything like that?
Considering nursing school.
My
I'm
condolences.
yeah, I'm not sure yet. I'm trying to figure out what I can do as far as physical work, just because I had the spinal fusion done.
Yeah.
Lifting people in beds might be hard, but I'll. I think I just want to keep going to school for a while. I'm enjoying it so
I
much.
get that. I get that feeling. It's like of my older brother and myself, perpetual students. I mean, I'm slowly scratching away at my NP. That'll go forever just because it's fun to do. It's fun to
But
challenge the brain, although it's so bloody expensive. That's part of one of
uh,
the things keeping me back is like, and I do not want to be, like in debt until I'm 1,000. Many
yeah,
docs graduate with so much debt for medical school, that they still are paying it off into their 50s. That's criminal. And
that,
people are like, oh, well, the rich doctor. Bullshit. That is not the case. Those nice cars that you see in the parking lot, that belongs to hospital administrators, which is a whole other discussion. But
yep, yep,
yeah, no, it's not what you think. Yes, there are like a small number of like plastic surgeons and like neurosurgeons who are like the best, who in the country. And yeah, they own the business, but those are businessmen and businesswomen. They're not practicing that much anymore, except for like the cases that are, like cherry picked. But the
right,
bulk of docs struggle. There are a
yeah,
lot issues. And in the UK, for example, there was a physician strike
Yeah,
because underpaid versus the cost of their education. And even in socialized medical systems, there are some really big financial issues there. Heck, a nurse here in the States out earns a physician abroad,
yeah,
a a bachelor, a BSN level nurse. I'm not talking about nurse practitioners and stuff. They are prescribers, and that's a different thing.
right.
But just like a nurse with a couple of years experience can out earn a physician abroad, and some docs here are out earned by like experienced nurses with, like I said, it's a tough situation, and we need to talk about like that kind of thing, not on this channel, but elsewhere,
Right.
about the problems of,
Yeah.
yeah. So
So
anyway, yeah. So how are you doing in school?
I am actually doing really well. I'm getting hundreds on everything.
Excellent.
I'm actually really impressed. I was
You should
once
be.
I up, I was like, oh no, what did I do? Like now I paid for it. But it's went surprisingly well. So
Good. I'm really happy to hear that. That's awesome. Proud of you too.
it's I was nervous. I was like, well, you know, it's gonna be different. You're gonna have to learn how to study again. But I did. So it's possible to do these things. It's just, you gotta everything's a little different. So you gotta figure out what works for you.
Is there any advice like that you would give to somebody, like who's thinking about this?
I would say, definitely, I mean, if you have the means to do, go for it. Like, if there's nothing holding you back, you should do it because it is really, it's fulfilling and it's making me, for me personally, it's giving me, sense of confidence
Yeah.
that just because things have changed, I I can still learn. It's not impossible. It's just more difficult. But
Yeah.
I'm still alive to be able to learn, so I want to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and we're glad to have you with both Detours and Friends of Brain Injury. You're an important asset. I mean, you're leadership for the company. So we're grateful to have you. And, we're glad you're doing this. And,
I'm grateful for you guys.
it's like, and we're glad it gave you the confidence. I mean, you're helping us here right now, and you're going, hopefully, it's like people will understand and will gain the confidence, you know.
Yes, just because your brain got an injury, that shouldn't hold you back.
Everybody who makes videos with us is very smart. Um, and that's something interesting is like, well, they wouldn't come here if they weren't both intelligent as well as with the brain injury. It's less about like damaging your IQ. Yes, you may lose some points off, but still remain intelligent. It's more about learning how to manage despite your ADD, ADHD type symptoms.
Yes.
That's really what this cooks down to is like use the techniques, like go and grab if you want to learn how to handle this, see, go to your local bookstore, go online, look at Amazon or one of the other booksellers out there that's online. Look for like a teacher's manual or parent's manual for like ADD, ADHD, or your learning disabled child is going to college. What now? And look for, like advice for how to manage it, and those techniques work for us too.
Yeah.
Or what the teacher recommends for advice for the high school teacher teaching learning disabled or ADD ADHD students. A lot of that stuff works for us too. Or university professor advice for that stuff works for us too. Talks about scheduling, helping focus attention, all those things that give us trouble. Or for the autistic child, going to college or whatever, stuff works for us too. Same thing. Yes, there are specialized books for people with brain injury going back to school. Same advice you'll find in there. Um,
Yep.
there are support groups online, of course, a lot of it talking about color coding, which is good too. Your
Yeah.
notes, highlight important points in yellow, and don't be afraid to get tutoring and support. Um, I had a little bit of a pride problem when I first went back for my nursing degree. I figured um, I could handle this. I did pre-med in education when I was undergrad before I started working towards my doctorate in neuropsych. Um, hey, I can handle nursing. Wrong. Um, yeah, I failed my first swing. And part of the problem is, it's like, don't be too proud to ask for help. You learn differently now. You do not learn the same way you learned before. And it is okay to seek help, to go to the tutoring lab ahead of time, asking for help. With your brain injury, you are entitled to accommodations. Ask your university, ask high school for accommodations. It's okay. You are entitled to those accommodations and in public school too. But by law, the university providing you with accommodations must do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, there's no reason not to try. They will give you the resources that you need. I know I'm getting help from my student advisor, and she's wonderful. She's helped me keep things really manageable. So I was really glad once I reached out to her.
Yeah, no, that's key. Um, Yeah. So, folks, it's like, as always, as we get ready to wrap up, I'll say, please share any comments below, suggestions, any messages you want for Emily or for me, or questions, or please click like, subscribe. Don't forget the bell icon. And we'll see you next time. We'll see Emily again next week, next Saturday. So, um, saying bye.